So good evening and thank you for agreeing to give an interview for Dalit Camera.
Pleasure.
So could you speak on caste in Indian media, the composition of caste?
I think there's very little doubt in my mind that the media, the Indian media, are the most exclusionist institution of Indian democracy. In every other sector, you will find that Dalits have made not just a mark, but much more than a mark. You have had Dalits, for instance, who've been presidents of the country, like my old Vice Chancellor K.R. Narayanan, who I believe was the best president this country had. You've had Dalit Chief Justices of the Supreme Court. You've had Dalit Chief Ministers, Governors, Vice Chancellors, you name it. You've had Dalits making it in areas where there is no reservation, like say the judiciary largely. But you can find, but while you can find Dalit chief ministers aplenty, you cannot find a Dalit at a chief sub-editor's level in a major newspaper, especially in the English language newspapers and in the channels as well. It is very, very hard to locate a Dalit. Now, if you're going to tell me that we can find presidents and potential prime ministers from this group of Indian society, but you can't find an editor, you can't find a senior journalist, someone very high up in the hierarchies of the news media. If you tell me that we can't find anyone, that I think is a bit ridiculous. So I think that they are excluded, one, in terms of the social composition of the media. And remember, because see, there is in this sector this is the private sector, there is no reservation here. Yet, even in the judiciary, there are Dalits. You have, therefore, a clear idea of exclusion by prejudice, whether conscious or otherwise. You do have a very clear exclusion of Dalits, and this also applies very largely to Adivasis. On this ground alone, you can see how exclusionist the media are. The second is in the content, in how, say, to the extent that Dalits and Adivasis are covered at all, how are they covered? In what situations are they covered? In what ways are they looked at? It's always that of a supplicant demanding something that he or she doesn't really deserve, or as a victim always in some situation or the other. So yeah, I would go with that. I would say that we are the most exclusionist institution of Indian democracy. If you look, see, there is also a problem there that if you look at the institutions of democracy, if you look at the so-called four pillars of democracy, the four pillars of the system, and the media being the fourth pillar, the Vice President of this country has pointed out in a very, very fine speech on, I think, the Golden Jubilee of the, of the Press Council of India, or one of those occasions, that it should never be forgotten that of the four estates of Indian democracy, the media are the only profit-seeking institution. The others are not. So there is also that, when you reduce journalism to a revenue stream, do I get money in reporting you or not? That is the question. Do I make revenue in reporting, agricultural laborers, Dalit women, migrant workers? Is there revenue in the media for it? Is there revenue for the media in that reporting or not? And if there is not, then you are much less likely to be covered.
So, in a lecture you delivered a day before at IAS, you said the timing given for covering in rural is abhorrent. So, could you talk?
Yeah, the Center for Media Studies in Delhi has been doing some pretty good work on coverage of various issues and let's say various sectors of news media reporting and coverage. In doing this, they looked at 6 major national channels, television channels, 3 Hindi, 3 English, and looked at prime time news coverage, at news reporting, at news coverage in prime time. Then they also looked at and they monitor 6 major newspapers, 3 English, 3 Hindi, and look at front page coverage. Because it's not just coverage, it's about what kind of coverage you get. So they looked at front page in the newspapers and prime time in the television. So agriculture gets 0.35%. Then they have a section called rural village, stroke village, which is rural stories other than agriculture. You get 0.18%. It is appalling, and even this is pretty distorted. Now, for instance, agriculture saying 0.35. A significant portion of that might be the Prime Minister visiting farmers or talking to a Kisan rally, or that comes under agriculture coverage. The same happens in other categories too. Like for instance, if you're covering Salman Khan or Sanjay Dutt, does it come under crime or does it come under entertainment? So there are those overlaps and those problems. So agriculture and rural India, village India, which is much bigger than agriculture, as you know, they get short shrift in this. Almost invisible, except, again, what is visible is what gets covered. Okay. You know, so suppose there's a terrible drought or there's a disaster in Uttarakhand and many people are washed away, these sort of things get covered. The everyday lives of everyday people don't get covered in that way at all.
And also you were talking about the media, news media being changing into the talking TV kind of a thing, only focusing on...
Yeah, see, this is a clear revenue model, talk TV. It's called talk TV, and the Indian television is largely into talk TV. You get about a couple of minutes of reporting, and then you get 5 wise men, you know, or whatever, debating the 2 minutes of reporting for half an hour, 1 hour, during election time forever. So let me give it to you this way. Suppose you wanted to cover the Uttarakhand disaster. You remember the calamity that occurred in Uttarakhand. Immediately on the first 2 days or so, television channels sent out their teams. There was some coverage and endless amount of panels and bickering and discussion, and the issue was not so much what happened as who was to blame. And to do a proper reporting job of that, you need reporters on the ground for the next month over there. You need people for a week at least. You can replace them with a second team. You need a constant, solid coverage and investigation of what happened. But that costs money, and newspapers and channels are not willing to spend, they're willing to spend money on star anchors and getting celebrities onto their screen, but they're not willing to spend that kind of money that requires the generation of proper, in-depth reporting. So you will remember that in the flood disasters, a clip which was taken by one journalist, I think a stringer, on the huge statue of Lord Shiva being submerged in the flood. Now, how many 100 times did you see that image? It's because nobody else did any other thing. It was very funny that the same image occurred on screen after screen after screen, channel after channel after channel, marked exclusive. Now there were about, I don't know, maybe 100 channels claiming to have that as an exclusive. It came from the same journalist, from the same single camera. Now that's talk TV. You are saving the money. You're not doing any reporting. But when you call people to the channel and you pay them 1,500 to 2,000, 3,000 rupees, that is not even 1% of what it would have cost had you done the proper coverage of it. And then you'll find that these 5 wise men, or usually they're men, though there is now a kind of tokenism about including a woman person, and though there are very, very fine women journalists, there will always be much fewer in number in those panels. You will find that often the same members of the panel are there on 5 different channels. I sometimes wonder whether the panelist knows whether he's coming or going or which studio he is in. Because I'm looking at it and they're having a panel discussion on Times Now, and A, B, C are there. And in the same, if you flip to channel, if you flip to NewsX, 2 of these 5 people are already there, also speaking at the same time, because these are recorded mostly. So this is the talk TV model, endless gas bagging with very little reporting, very little real ground journalism.
In colonial period, in spite of rural sufferings and famine, we do not find about suicides of peasants. How do we analyze the lacks of suicides today, and when we have our own government in power?
By the way, I mean, you see, there was no one keeping data in the colonial period on this. We don't know. But what we do know is that there is no reports of large-scale suicides. There is no reports of large-scale suicides. There is no report of... because, by the way, in the colonial period, not lakhs but millions of deaths occurred due to famine.
Famine,
Yeah.
suicides.
Suicides, whether there were suicides within that or not, we don't know, but no one wrote about them. So we can assume that there was not such a widespread phenomenon. But you lost tens of millions of lives in the famine caused by the British Raj. Take, for instance, the Bengal Famine. There is a brilliant book 2 years ago by Madhushri Mukherjee on Churchill's secret war. They knew what they were doing. They knew they were condemning the poor of Bengal to, mass deaths, and yet they went ahead and did it. Coming to the present age, there is one thing that the colonial government did, which present governments are reluctant to do. Colonial governments, there were several anti-indebtedness acts. There were several loan waivers. There was the Punjab Indebtedness Act of 1934. Madras Presidency, which includes present-day Tamil Nadu and some of the other parts of other southern states, also had in 1937 an Indebtedness Act, Cultivators Indebtedness Act. The colonial administration was aware of what trouble, of what kind of explosion could occur from the uprising of farmers. Also, please be aware and remember that in that time there were no nationalized banks, there were no public sector or scheduled commercial banks. They were essentially money lenders who were the source of the loans. Money lenders were the source of the loans, and you will find thousands of instances of poor people, Adivasis, others, rising and fighting money lenders and even killing money lenders. That happened on quite a substantial scale. In responding, and remember that money lenders, landlords were the class allies of the colonial order. The interesting thing is that the colonial rule was willing to occasionally sacrifice the interests of its class ally in order to keep the stability of its rule. In the current day, quite a similar situation has arisen with new unique elements. There are money lending and usury went down by the early 80s. It had come down significantly with bank nationalization, the extension of loan to smaller farmers. Money lending had declined significantly as a share of the total credit going around. From 1990s, with the new economic policies, the withdrawal of the state, the number of bank branches in rural India collapsing very, very heavily, informal credit once again begins to rise. Farm loans, Sahukar, the money lender, the Taragar, again, these become very, very important people as a result of the banks withdrawing from their mandated role of helping small and poor people and marginal sections of society. So there is in fact an incredible cruelty to what is going on in our present day, in our present system. There are, by the way, loan waivers every year worth 5 lakh crores in the statement of revenue foregone for the top 1% or 2% of Indian society, and certainly for the corporate. I believe that we run the biggest corporate welfare state in the world after the United States.
So what defines the agriculture sector today in India as it is the basis to economic development?
Well, the share of agriculture in GDP has fallen very, very sharply. But you still have significant numbers of people dependent on agriculture. Everybody dependent or engaged with agriculture is not a farmer. For instance, the tens of millions of agricultural laborers we have, predominantly staffed by Dalits and Adivasis, they're not farmers. I call them landless farmers because they have the skills, they have that expertise. They are not officially farmers, but they are also part of the agrarian structure. Agriculture in India is in a gigantic crisis. It's in a gigantic crisis. Then you can look at it in terms of the number of full-time farmers, which is cultivator, main worker in the census, has declined by nearly 15 million between 1991 and 2011. The numbers of agricultural laborers is going up because many farmers are losing their status as full-time cultivators, as main cultivators. In my home state of Andhra Pradesh, I'm talking in 2011, it was a consolidated state of Telangana and AP. The number of farmers declined by 1.3 million in the census, but the number of agricultural laborers rose by 3.4 million. So not only it means across the country, and you'll find similar situations, millions of farmers are losing their status as cultivator main workers and becoming agricultural laborers, plus other sections of the countryside are being forced into the agrarian underclass, which is the poorest. They are the poorest sections of Indian society, especially if you take Dalit or Adivasi women. Those are the poorest sections of Indian society. And agriculture, you'll find I've written a lot on this. I don't want to repeat myself.
Even the lectures also, sir.
Yeah.
A lot of lectures.
Yeah. So you've had more than 300,000 farmers suicides in the last 20 years. You have a government that claims that it will double farmers' income by 2022, where there is not a single policy or a word of how this is to be done.
Yeah.
You have stagnation of investment in agriculture, even negative downturns to it. You have no policy that shows that it will help agricultural laborers or for that matter, farmers. In fact, if you look, NREGS has suffered severe damage in the last 2-3 years, not just under the BJP, but even under the Congress. Mr. Chidambaram was already undermining it, and the BJP came and straight away cut 53% from the budget of NREGS budget of Tripura, which is the #1 state in the country for NREGS. They claim that they have the highest ever allocation for NREGS, which really tells me they have very silly people who haven't done their homework. The first budget of NREGS when the program was initiated was 40,000 crores. This is 38,000, which includes 6,500 crores of unpaid dues and liabilities. Now, for the poor worker in the countryside, that has been a lifeline. If you went to Telangana, you went to Tripura, you will see person after person telling you, don't take it away unless you want to kill us. So none of these things, agriculture is moving from disaster to catastrophe.
Okay. So how do you see the market and environmental problems in the context of climate change affecting the peasant classes?
Professor Swaminathan has used the terminology to say that the Indian peasant is trapped between market and monsoon.
Okay.
But I think that there is validity to that statement. However, increasingly, the peasant, the farmer, the laborer are affected, and their the impact on them is driven by policy. Agricultural workers, landless laborers and marginal farmers are affected by how you treat the NREGS, which is a policy. Farmers are affected by how you work on the question of price, cost, inputs, the kind of the policies you take relating to this matter a very great deal to them. Price shocks, credit, all these things matter. So you're really looking at very, very serious policy driven, and much of this policy is driven in the name of the market, as if it is the market. Now how come that same market, none of those rules apply to the rich? None of these rules apply to the rich. Your NREGS budget is 38,000 crores, right? And it's called a subsidy and whatever. 5,34,000 crores is what you have written off in the statement of revenue foregone under direct corporate income tax, under customs duty exemptions, under excise duty waivers, just under those three heads. Do you know that from 2006 to 2015, those exemptions add up to 42.3 trillion rupees. Trillion is 12 zeros, by the way. 42.3 trillion rupees. You know, you can run the NREGS on the present cost for 100 years on that. You can run your food security for I don't know how many years on the basis of that kind of money. Your agriculture budget of 34,000 crores, please compare it to the 5,34,000 crores that have been written off. So I think that this is policy driven. There's been a massive negative impact on the poor, marginal and vulnerable sections of Indian society, particularly those at the bottom of the heap. Environmental concerns, when you talk about market, where the heck does the market have a concern for environment? On what basis does it have? You and I are sitting in Himachal Pradesh. Okay? We are sitting where corporates are descending on the fragile Himalayan ecosystem, and tearing out huge swathes of hills, whether it's hydroelectric or cement or construction or 1,000 other projects are going on, which are going to have very serious consequences on this fragile ecozone. On the other hand, people who have, like the Dalits of Kandaroda in Shimla district, etc., these are marginal farmers owning less than 1 biga, 5 bigas make 1 acre. They've actually added to the tree cover with some forest, with some apple trees. Their trees are being cut down massively. They're extremely vulnerable. Their economies are very fragile. But then they're Dalits, so you can do it. Yeah? You can just go about it. On the other hand, resorts are coming up. Massive industrial projects which cut 80,000 trees at one time are coming up. Yeah? On the one hand, you are subsidizing, incentivizing those who are cutting lakhs of trees in the state. On the other hand, you are cutting down the trees of marginal Dalit farmers in the state. I think it's going to lead to massive alienation, discontent and disaffection. And it is also so clearly a blatant act of discrimination. You cannot separate the element of prejudice from what's going on.
So adding to this what you were explaining now, can I ask another question based on that? The capitalist economy, in urban capitalist economy, exhausting rural resources, including prime agricultural land.
Yeah.
During this process, do you see that affecting any caste relation in rural India changing? But the system of oppression is, that oppression also changes.
One thing, Ravichandran, is that I find these people come and tell me, you fellows all speak of caste. This was all an issue in my grandmother's time in the villages. Today it's not like that. My gardener's son goes to college. Why should your gardener's son not go to college? Is it some great thing that, you know, are you enabling your gardener's son to go to college? Are you going and writing his exams? You know, this is a very patronizing and ridiculous attitude. And first of all, it makes the biggest wrong assumption that caste is somehow rural and not urban. Or I keep telling people, if you think that if I keep telling people that if you think caste doesn't exist and it's a largely an urban problem, please open your Sunday newspaper and look at the goddamn matrimonial columns, which are highly urban, global. The NRI advertisements are the most casteist of all. Not only do they specify caste, subcaste, region, they even specify the Gotra name. You know, the Gotra also is specified in their ads. So please don't tell me that caste is something that only people from rural India practice.
But whether it changed?
It has changed. It has.
In the sense of form of oppression has changed, or
yeah, I would say new forms of oppression
have come up.
I would say that some old forms may have declined. I find, for instance.
But it was quite interesting. Sorry to interrupt. It was quite interesting. You were saying that the car panchayat in the.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. See, my argument is that many in the last 20-25 years of turmoil for poor people and great benefits for the rich, in rural India, some of the best and the most beautiful things have been destroyed. Art, theatre, literature, many of these things have declined sharply. Languages, 225 languages have died in 50 years according to the People's Linguistic Survey of India. You can guess whose languages those were. Those of the marginalized sections, those of marginalized people. And on the one hand, some of the most beautiful and works of creation, values have declined and died or are seriously threatened. On the other hand, rural India is also home to some of the most barbaric, regressive and brutal phenomena, and those, alas, have been strengthened by the processes of the last 20 years. I can tell you that the Caps were not so powerful in Haryana 30 years ago. They feared a lathi, they feared a police intervention, they feared the law and order machinery. Today they don't. They believe that the policeman is theirs. He participates, he will uphold the decision of the CAP in his individual capacity. They've got a chief minister who says the CAPs are a social, moral institution upholding values in society. So while some of the best and the brightest have faded or are disintegrating, the Haryana CAPs are far more powerful today than they were 30 years ago. I will also show you. Look at, let's take a city, let's take urban India. Let us take major housing complexes. Let us take automobile ownership. Any of these. Check in Mumbai or in Delhi, in the major housing complexes. Please see what percentage of Dalits and Adivasis you find as house owners. And then you even look at what percentage of Dalits and Adivasis can rent houses in buildings controlled by other sectors or other castes of society. I had a great friend who told me one of the most interesting things about how law has changed. His name is Chunilal Jatav, a Dalit and a left-wing person, a militant fighter from Kumher village in Rajasthan, where 20 odd years ago, a great massacre of Dalits occurred. 10 years later when I went, the charges had not been framed in the case. And when I asked Chunilal Jatav, why is this so? He said, Sainath ji, all the learned judges of the Supreme Court do not have the power of our local Havaldar. The learned judges interpret the law, my Havaldar writes his own laws. And that's a fact. That is a fact. I then did a story on the 7 stages before a Dalit can enter a court. First he goes to the police station, he is begging for entry, he has to pay some money, some goose to get in there, and then they may not register the complaint. There are about 7 stages like this: intimidation of witnesses, delays in recording of witness statements. Once it goes to the court, begging the peshkar for a proper date for the court to appear. And then, in those cases I found, even in the fast track cases or special courts, rate of conviction was 1%, 0.8%. After all that struggle to get there. Now the number of Dalit lawyers in the Rajasthan High Court was statistically negligible. In Jaipur there were 8. There were a couple of government pleaders. So yes, it has shown up in new institutional forms also. It shows up in, if you look at, say, the Sangeet Natak academies of many states, you look at the various academies of various states, you'll find that Dalits and Adivasis have made great contributions to culture, to the arts, but they don't sit on these bodies, very rarely. You know, it's not at all proportionate to their role and their contribution in society. So so exclusion has renewed some of its old forms and extended to new forms either. But so many of us in the middle classes want to believe that this is an exaggeration, that it will go away as society becomes more capitalist. The thing that we need to understand is that in India, capitalism and feudalism, that is capitalism and caste, had a very happy marriage and they're living happily ever after. Every single capitalist house in this, business house in this country, please analyze its shareholding pattern and show me what diversity you find in the shareholders' caste backgrounds. Sometimes you will find that some of the biggest corporations in this country, those holding 70% of the shares will come from the same region, the same language background, the same caste background, the same subcaste, and the same gotra very often. So even in urban India, it's renewed itself in different ways. In rural India, it's gotten hideous because the old hierarchies have been shaken up, and that leads to a huge amount of. The question is, I am all for those hierarchies being shaken up. I am for those hierarchies being shaken up and disintegrating if it means the liberation and elevation of the oppressed. But that's not happening.
So one question which many of our friends and professors wanted to ask actually. The thing is, even I also, since for the last 2 days, in your lecture you used to say that you were from Andhra Pradesh and of course Tamil Nadu also. So in Andhra Pradesh, Karamchedu, Chunduru, Vempeta, and then Lakshmipeta now.
Every single one of them.
In Devars. So that here the feudal landlords who owned the land and the Dalits were working there and the other classes also working there. So that people wanted to ask you, and they asked me to ask, why is there, have you, in your entire work as a rural reporter, have you explored this caste in the work in Tamil Nadu especially, the Devars' relation with the Pallars who are agricultural laborers, and Paramakudi violence, a lot of violence, Kilvenmani, like that.
You will find
so that
several Gangai Kondan.
Yeah. So that they were saying that Sir used to give lectures in ACJ College about the caste relation within how do we see caste within this form. But his work, and as a journalist also, they were saying that it was not reflecting much. Maybe I just want to
No, I think that's wrong.
Okay.
And you will find that I did what remains the largest series in the mainstream Indian press on Dalits and untouchability, out of which what Tamil Nadu was very prominently figured.
Okay.
So your friends have simply not read my work and they're unaware of it. And if you please, I was the one who went back and did a 20-year review of the Meenakshipuram conversions.
20-year review, okay.
Yeah, 19 years, I went in the 19th year to do the review of what happened, and you'll find the stories. There are almost 4 pages of stories on this. Almost, we're talking about 3 full pages worth of stories in the Hindu Sunday magazine on Meenakshipuram, in which I found that a substantial number of those who had converted had actually improved their lives. There was a 10% reconversion, mainly women, Dalit women reconverted because they found their role strongly circumscribed in Islam.
Okay.
So, yeah. I also did stories on how in the same house, a brother and a sister belonging to the same family, siblings, one could remain a Hindu and one could be a Muslim. People in Meenakshipuram had worked out their relations with everyone. And in fact, I think it was a very, very sobering and learning exercise for me. So there are the Meenakshipuram pieces. I have done extensive reporting on the violence that you speak about. Like say, a kabaddi game. A kabaddi game in Gangaikondan, which led eventually to 24 deaths in killings and counter killings because the idiot who organized the game in that high school at Gangaikondan organized the teams on caste lines. Okay? And what happened? The Dalits won. Once that happened, I don't need to tell you what followed. People were pulled off buses and murdered with saw. So this story was done. Let me tell you, there were a number of such stories. However, I maintain that to understand the damage that untouchability does, to understand the damage that caste does, you should not take only the spectacular incident. The thing about caste or untouchability is it grinds its victim down every day. Not in one spectacle. It's the everyday burden, the everyday cracking of the human spirit. For me, the saddest story I did in that series, one of the saddest things that I ever did, was looking at the midday meal caste alignments. So I'm very surprised that your friends are unaware of this. I don't know what they read.
Okay.
I did this thing in the caste basis of midday meals. You know that there are in many, Tamil Nadu also, in many places, parents have refused to let their children eat the midday meal if the cook is a Dalit or the cleaner or helper is a Dalit. In Odisha, like in many other parts of the country, in Kalahandi, every midday meal the children are seated according to caste. Okay? So, when I was examining this along with my friends, my friend Purushottam, Jagdish Suna, a Dalit, Jagdish is a Dalit, a journalist who later became the Sarpanch of Bongamunda in Bolangir district. We went, what we did at that midday meal, we sat with the different caste groups. I sat with, one of us sat with a Dalit girl. She was not 8 years old yet. One sat with the dominant castes over there. One sat with the Adivasis. So we asked the Dalit, and we asked the children, each of us, why are we sitting here separately? Why are we not sitting together with the other ones? The dominant caste child said, oh, how can we do that, no? Suppose they touch our food, we'll have to throw everything away. But my heart broke when the girl, 8-year-old child, when we asked her, why are we sitting here separately? She said, वो भले लोग हैं, हम नीच लोग हैं. They are good people and we are नीच. I wept that day. If you have indoctrinated an 8-year-old child into thinking that she is inferior, you have effectively destroyed her life. At that age, you have destroyed her life. Okay? So I could give you 50 examples, and you will find that these are also not stories of 200-word reports, but these are all 1500 words or so. There's more than 80,000 words, the book length of the stories done on this very issue.
Also, you said yesterday that you're bringing a book, you were sitting on a book on Dalits for a long time.
Too long. That is what I meant, which is these articles. Okay. Plus, if I want to update a few things, I have also written, apart from this, on the issues of the new prejudices that have come up. You can look for an article called the fear of democracy. Okay. The fear of the privileged and the fear of democracy.
Okay.
writing on the 50th death anniversary of Baba Saheb Ambedkar
Okay.
and the rally in Mumbai, which was reported in the media entirely as a traffic disaster.
Oh yeah, I read that, which
Yeah.
you wrote. Yeah, I read that.
So there are many such things I've
Yeah.
written. Nowadays I'm writing on other things. I'm a reporter who writes on many subjects.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So one thing is also, last two questions are there. How should one see, which even yesterday you spoke about the Rohit Vemula suicide and the coverages the media has been neglecting. Initial time they did report it, but later part it has subsided. So how do you see it?
See, first of all, I will say what I said at the University of Hyderabad a few days after his death. Let's not look just at how Rohit Vemula died. Let's learn the lessons of how he lived. According to census 2011, 400 million Indians have never ever entered an educational institution. They've never entered an educational institution. Less than some 3% of rural families have a graduate member. 3%. In the Guntur area from where he came, there are significant vestiges of bonded labor. For me, this was the achievement of Rohit Vemula. Coming out of that 400 million, coming out of those who were not part of the 3%, coming out of that kind of background of discrimination and oppression, he makes it to one of the best central universities as a PhD scholar on his own stream outside the reservation thing. And this life is destroyed by prejudice. Right? So I'm saying, please look at how he lived. There are lessons in that also. And there is also, I think, what is easily forgotten. It's not just tragedy, there is achievement. There is serious achievement there. And one needs to look at that. That was what I answered.
So last one question, sir. So this is about in 2014, the Hindu circulated notice that about the vegetarians only practice in the institution. And it was very shocking for many of us, and that is one. Adding to that, we did contact one of the online media magazine, online version, Media Watch, who work on that. They also said, it's not great, or it's not only thing happens in Hindu. It happens in across all medias. Therefore, I thought I should take your voice on what is this.
See, it happens across all media, but I'm saying it's happening much more seriously in many other ways as well. This was a kind of a silliness that was, I don't know, it was like somebody had nothing to do and went and did this. Okay? But
in the sense, you mean bringing the notice of ban?
Kind of notice and stuff.
And even, I think the earlier reporter who worked with Hindu, Malarvili, she wrote a blog on Erumai, I think. Her blog is in Tamil.
No, I'm not ready.
So that she, in English she writes, so that in English she wrote that how Hindu has been practicing caste. I'm not asking as you are, I'm not asking that one.
I'm not talking.
Yeah, that is what. No, I'm not asking, I'm not seeing you as I'm just asking as a reporter working with the Hindu. How was the possibility of discrimination, and in context to the report which they bought about the non-vegetarian, and also all other journals,
Okay.
not that particular.
First, to be fair to them, and that brings me back to your earlier question, they carried the largest series on Dalits in the country. Second, if you do a if you do a content analysis of the copy that has appeared in the Hindu, you will find that they have given much more space, not only in the Hindu but in the front line, where some of the most serious reporting of the violence in Tamil Nadu against Dalits has appeared. So it would be unfair, even though I have my strong differences with the paper, I have very, very strong, significant, differences which saw me resign from the paper. I will still say it will be very unfair not to acknowledge that newspaper has done far more serious reporting. Hindu and the Sunday magazine and Frontline have done far more serious reporting on Dalits. which has given more voice to Dalits than any other newspaper, which also brings me to another point. When you are trying to look at, like say, your friends were not aware of the fact that I wrote a series of 50 pieces. Can you, Ravichandran, name another series of 50 pieces in the Indian press, in the mainstream, large national press? 50 pieces in a row, given full page, front, and many of them front paged. How many other series can you remember? You have
in case if you ask me about Dalits, I would remember from media. I would certainly say the Frontline, which they published as a book, Vishwanathan, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a magazine. I'm talking about the daily newspapers. Okay, and so again, that also answers your question about the Hindu. It has had these spaces. It has had that kind of encouragement. And in writing those pieces, I was not once censored. Not one piece of mine was killed in those 50 pieces. Not one piece of mine was killed. Not one piece of mine was tampered with. I will say all this on record, and I hope that in any criticism I make, you must also put this on record. That not a single piece was tampered with. You can go and read those pieces. They're up there in the Hindu thing. On the other hand, the same phenomenon that affects the Indian press as a whole, a glaring shortage of correspondence from Dalit backgrounds, Adivasi backgrounds, minority backgrounds. That will show up in the Hindu as it will show up in many other newspapers, though it might there also prove to be marginally better. You have had Dalit correspondence. I will not, though, however, say that is a great achievement. It needs to be incredibly more broad-based before I will say that.
So last, adding to the Hindu, ACJ College of Journalism. In India, there are many journalism courses, journalism offered. And I think ACJ is one of the, at least in Asia level, it is one of the prominent, well-known journalism school, as far as I know. And in that school, that is the only school which follows at least some kind of giving scholarship. So that, could you answer two things? How are the journalism school going ahead? Because the media people go from the journalism school, and ACJ at least has some fellowship. So that, could you talk about that?
Firstly, I will confess to a bias here. I teach at the ACJ. And I think that the ACJ has, so my bias is this, I will say, the ACJ has followed very enlightened principles on the issues of representation. It has tried very hard, it has set up fellowships, it has created remedial courses in the English language for those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds who don't have that expertise. It's tried all this, and I'm quite proud to be associated with that exercise. It has done another thing in its content. ACJ is the one school that has created a compulsory course called Covering Deprivation, which is the course in which I lecture, in which Professor K. Nagaraj speaks on economics, where a significant amount of discussion on Dalit issues comes up, on discrimination, on reservation. I deal with those issues every time, as your friend said that he speaks about it in ACJ. But the thing that I speak about in ACJ is entirely based on my work as a reporter in the field. So they found the second part, but they missed the first part. I cannot speak on the issue if I have not worked on it. I never speak on an issue on which I have not done work. So journalism schools, there are a couple of other journalism schools where there are individuals trying to do something on the representation front. That has happened.
Tegalka, right?
I would say Sophia's in Mumbai, places like that. They've tried doing it. But that is usually the work of the department or the individuals in the department pushing it. Journalism schools are now increasingly in the private sector, where the same logic of media, revenue is the first criterion. There are not going to be reservations in that, or there will be token reservations and token issues. There will be one token Dalit appointed, or students take it on. But mostly, most of them do not even go for the pretense of trying to achieve representation. It is not, they will tell you, this is not our mandate. It may be the government of India's mandate. However, journalism schools all over the country are in trouble. The media are contracting.
Okay.
Jobs in media are, in print media, jobs are falling. And I think that suddenly, if you look at it in the 90s, there was a huge explosion and proliferation of journalism schools. Even ACJ arrives around that time. So then every channel and many channels, newspapers started their own journalism school as a kind of in-house, as a kind of gene pool from which they would get their labor. Many of these are in trouble because people who are going, as a result you'll find all over the world, it's not just India, it's happened in the US. More and more people going into journalism schools are going into public relations, corporate CSR, because the jobs in journalism are getting fewer and fewer.
So, how are the Dalits on internet? How are they using it? Because you might be following some of the debates.
See, Ravichandran, there are Dalits on the internet, and that is a very good thing. But we should not get carried away to somehow think that their situation is much better. Yes, it is in a sense of relative autonomy, it is.
Okay.
And I am very supportive. I'm very supportive of Dalit experiments in media. And I think that has to happen. But we should not concede the space of the mainstream media and say, okay, we will go and live in our little ghettos. I want both. I want your alternative, I want your vigorous independent activity, and I want your entry, and I want justice in the media, mainstream media also. I'll say, okay, they're not playing with me, so I'll leave the arena and I will go and sit in a small room which will be my independent initiative. I'm saying you have to have both.
Okay.
One of the most serious issues, to come back to the first line I told you, one of the most serious issues of ending, or one of the most serious arenas of discrimination raises the question of democratization of the media. That is a must. And democratization of the media must have a strong representational component.
So, I think last point I interrupted you when you were talking about that circular which was coming in Hindu, that non-vegetarian circular. Could you just... Yeah.
I'm saying, look at what is happening right now in the country in terms of vegetarian. Do you know how many housing societies in Chennai, in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi, practice serious exclusion on the basis of vegetarian, non-vegetarian? There are housing societies that make it explicitly clear that no meat eater can ever get a place here, can ever rent a flat here, let alone own one over here. Please also look what's happened in terms of prejudice with the extension, say in Maharashtra, the cow slaughter ban has been extended to bulls and bullocks and other varieties. That has devastated, for instance, Dalits very badly, who are, say, in the leather industry. In the famous Kolhapuri chappal is now in the doldrums. Now, Mr. Fadnavis and his BJP government thought that this is a great Hindu move that will hurt the Muslims. Of course it hurt the Muslims. By the way, it hurt Hindus, it hurt Christians, it hurt Dalits very severely. The Marathas and OBCs and the dominant groups like Marathas are also heavily involved in the cattle markets. As farmers, you are heavily involved in the cattle economy. Now what happens, Ravichandran, to a farmer, as you can see in Maharashtra? He's got 10 cows. He's in the middle, and say, or any farmer owning a few cows, he's in the middle of a terrible drought, in the middle of a horrible water crisis. He is unable to feed his own family. How is he going to feed the cows? And today he can't sell them off because the cattle market has collapsed. So he is watching his cows die in front of his eyes. And the great champions of the sacred cow are in fact have made legislation that is leading to the death of cows by starvation and hunger. Okay, and secondly, now you know that with the ban, cattle hides are also coming to Maharashtra from Tamil Nadu, from Krompet, from the tanneries and the leather industry. Do you know what's happening? The vans are being attacked by activists of Bajrang Dal BHP in Karnataka and in Maharashtra. The lack of hides has already, the Kolhapur industry was in a serious problem. Now the lack of hides is putting incredible pressure on the small leather worker. Who is the small leather worker? Who is he? He's a Dalit. So they are coming under extreme pressure. This is the kind of stuff going on in the name of cow slaughter, beef ban, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, the whole works. People are being lynched for taking cattle to the market.
So no, actually I was asking that non-veg Hindu, that circular which was circulating. I interrupted when you were saying
I
this.
vaguely remember that. I'm saying I found it silly.
What?
I found it entirely silly.
Silly.
And I've said, as I said, it's like somebody having nothing to do made a notice.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, okay. Sir, and thanks a lot for giving us.
You're welcome.